clang. The sound sliced through the quiet Tuesday morning like a gunshot. It was the precise moment Karen, the self-appointed queen of Willowbrook Estates and long-reigning HOA president, committed a federal crime in broad daylight, wearing a silk bathrobe and gripping a pair of bolt cutters like a weapon of war. She didn't know it yet, but by cutting that security chain, she didn't just violate HOA rules. She triggered a multi-agency federal response, put herself on the radar of Homeland Security, and set off a chain of events that would end with handcuffs, headlines, and 8 years in federal prison. The chain she cut was wrapped around a black Jeep Wrangler parked neatly in the driveway of 327 Maple Lane. It wasn't just any Jeep, it belonged to the Federal Drug Task Force. Inside, over 347,000 worth of surveillance equipment, encrypted communications gear, and federal-issued tracking systems. And its owner, Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, deployed 8,000 miles away on a classified joint operation targeting a major cartel supply route. Maya's voice cracked over the satellite call as she stood barefoot in their grandmother's kitchen, watching from the front window in terror. Tank. She's cutting the lock. A tow truck just pulled up. They're trying to take the Jeep. Tank bolted upright in a sweltering field tent, adrenaline hitting harder than the desert sun. It wasn't just a car. It was federal property. It was evidence. And it was his. And the woman touching it had no idea who she was messing with. Karen was the kind of suburban tyrant you read about in HOA horror threads online. She measured grass with a ruler, fined people for holiday lights left up past New Year's, and believed her position gave her absolute control over her neighborhood kingdom. With 7 years as HOA president and a husband on the city council, she felt untouchable. To her, Tank's Jeep, marked with Federal Task Force and loaded with military-grade tech, was nothing but an eyesore. Never mind that the HOA rules, the original ones signed in 1987, clearly exempted government, military, and emergency vehicles. She had decided it, violated community aesthetics. And once Karen decided something was out of place, it had to go. Even if it meant breaking federal law to make it happen. What she didn't know was that Tank wasn't just a soldier. He was a federal agent trained to dismantle organized crime. He didn't panic. He documented every security alert from the Jeep's internal system. Every motion detected, every GPS ping, every camera capture was automatically transmitted to federal databases the moment she touched that lock. Karen didn't realize she had just triggered a federal property tampering alert that notified 3 different agencies. The tow truck driver, seeing the federal decals and blinking security lights, hesitated. "Lady, I ain't towing this. That's government property. You on your own." He burned rubber out of the driveway, but not before Karen screamed. And Maya recorded a sentence that would later become Exhibit A. "I am the HOA president. I have legal authority to remove any violations. I don't care if it's government issued." That statement, captured on 3 cameras, would be replayed in a courtroom. And it would seal her fate. See, Karen wasn't just breaking HOA rules. She wasn't just harassing a military family. She was about to learn a lesson the hard way. When you mess with a federal task force vehicle, you don't just get a fine. You get an arrest warrant. This wasn't just about a Jeep. This was about a pattern, a system. Maya had already begun uncovering a disturbing trend. Military families in Willowbrook being fined, harassed, and pushed out. This wasn't an accident. This was targeted discrimination masked behind fake violations and HOA legalese. And Karen, the self-righteous suburban tyrant, had just stepped over the line. The snap of that bolt cutter didn't just break a chain. It broke open a case that would expose embezzlement, organized discrimination, civil rights violations, political corruption, and harassment so systematic, it would become a federal RICO case. And Marcus, Tank Rodriguez, he wasn't just fighting for his Jeep anymore. He was fighting for every family Karen had tried to silence. Just like Grandma Rosa used to say, "Mio, never fear loud bullies. You fight them the right way, with truth." He was about to do just that. 327 Maple Lane wasn't just a house. It was the scent of fresh tortillas drifting from the kitchen every morning. It was the soft creak of wooden floors that echoed with laughter and bedtime stories. It was the warmth of Grandma Rosa humming Spanish lullabies while stirring cinnamon tea. It was the last piece of something sacred. For Marcus, that house was never about property value. It was about legacy. It was a promise. When Grandma Rosa passed, he inherited the house. The same home that had sheltered him after a car crash stole both his parents when he was 12. She raised him with tough love, faith, and resilience. And in her final years, she whispered just one request: "Mijo, keep our home." No matter what, It's ours. Marcus never questioned it. He didn't sell. Didn't flip it. He kept it as it was, creaky floors, rose bushes, cinnamon in the walls. He planned to rent it out while deployed. Use the income, build equity, and most of all honor her. But what he didn't know, what no one could have imagined, was that just 2 weeks after he left for active duty, his sister Maya would be caught in a nightmare. It started with a piece of paper in the mailbox. Violation notice, unauthorized commercial vehicle parked in driveway. Then a fine $50 per day. Then a letter threatening property lien. And finally, the most chilling part, a personal call from Karen herself. Maya, a gentle middle school teacher who had never broken a rule in her life, tried to explain. She brought Karen a copy of Marcus's deployment orders. She even offered to cover the Jeep with a tarp. Karen didn't even look at the paper. She simply said, rules are rules. If your brother can't follow simple community standards, perhaps this neighborhood isn't a fit for your family. Maya returned home shaking. She stood in the same kitchen where Grandma used to hum, staring at the spot where Rosa would sit and fold napkins for Sunday dinners. She called Marcus, tried to sound calm, but her voice cracked. Tank, she threatened my job, said Carl knows people at the district board. Said if I cause problems, it might reflect badly on the school. That was the moment Marcus felt something shift inside him. Because this wasn't about a car anymore. This was about intimidation, about humiliation, about being told you don't belong. Then came the pattern. Maya noticed the Marine next door, Mr. Johnson, got cited for leaving his motorcycle slightly angled in the garage. Sarah Martinez, a Navy wife, was fined for having garden gnomes that were deemed unprofessional. The Washington family, whose infant cried at night, received a violation for excessive noise after 10 p.m. All military families, all targeted. That's when Maya decided to dig. She opened Grandma's old filing cabinet. In a box buried beneath decades of receipts and family photos, she found the original HOA documents signed in 1987. There it was, in black and white: government emergency, and military vehicles are exempt from residential parking restrictions. Karen had been lying, fabricating rules, counting on people being too scared, too overwhelmed, or too trusting to check. This wasn't about standards. This was organized discrimination, a calculated purge. Karen wasn't acting alone. Her husband Carl, a city councilman, had real estate ambitions. And families like theirs, families with deployments, duty, and no time to fight back, they were easy targets. But Karen had made one fatal miscalculation. She thought Maya was weak, that her soft voice and quiet job as a teacher meant she wouldn't fight back. But what Karen didn't know was that Maya was Grandma Rosa's granddaughter, and Rosa had raised warriors. Maya picked up her phone, her hands still trembling. She called Marcus one more time, but this time her voice was steadier. Tank, I found the real bylaws. She's faking everything. She's trying to erase us. There was silence on the line. And then Marcus replied, calm but razor sharp. Then we bring the truth, and we bring it hard. Because this wasn't just about parking anymore. This was war, and they were ready. It all started with an old, yellowed binder Maya found in one of Grandma Rosa's boxes. Tucked behind family recipes, utility bills from the 90s, and a stack of handwritten letters tied with string. Inside was something that would change everything: the original Willowbrook HOA covenant dated 1987. Not the glossy revised versions Karen liked to distribute. Not the intimidating PDF files with legalese and threats, the real rules. And on page 12, under the section titled Vehicle Parking and Residential Standards, was a line Maya read 3 times to believe: vehicles belonging to the government, military, or emergency services are exempt from residential parking restrictions. Her heart pounded. Every fine, every warning, every threat, all of it illegitimate. The Jeep in their driveway, Marcus's federally assigned task force vehicle, had never been in violation. Karen had been lying. More than that, she had fabricated rules and used her position to enforce a false reality. And Maya, she wasn't about to stay silent. She scanned every violation, filed them in folders, and began recording every incident. Emails, voicemails, visits. She bought a window camera and documented Karen circling the house, clipboard in hand, snapping photos like she owned the place. And one afternoon, buried in another box of Grandma's records, Maya found something even more disturbing: a letter from Karen, addressed to the City Planning Commission in 2019. It was short, direct, chilling. Transient military populations do not create stable community values and should not be prioritized in neighborhood housing assistance. Translation: Karen had been actively working to keep military families out of Willowbrook for years. Maya printed the letter. She spread it next to the list of military families she'd seen Karen target: the Johnsons' Marine family, the Martinez's Navy family, the Washington's Army veterans, the Rodriguez's her own. She circled each name, red ink. Pattern. Targeting. This wasn't isolated. It was a purge. She called Marcus. Her voice was low but resolute. Tank, this isn't just about us. It's systematic. She's been driving out every military family in this neighborhood, one by one. There was a long silence on the line. And then Marcus replied, "We fight it, legally, thoroughly, and we document every step." Marcus forwarded everything to the Judge Advocate General's JG, the military's legal corps. Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams reviewed the case. Her reaction, immediate. "Rodriguez, this isn't an HOA problem. This is targeted harassment of service members and tampering with federal property. That's felony territory." Within hours, a military federal liaison task force opened a review. Karen's actions were now being monitored officially. But Karen, she escalated. She came back, walked the perimeter of their property, snapping photos, taking notes, used a measuring tape to check distances from the Jeep to the street curb, and then, with a smug smile, told Maya, "Military service doesn't exempt your family from community standards. Maybe it's time to consider whether this neighborhood fits your lifestyle." Maya didn't respond. She didn't need to, because the Jeep had recorded everything. Federal task force vehicles come equipped with high-grade surveillance tech, motion sensors, night vision, GPS, triggered audio, high-resolution internal cameras. Karen had triggered every one of them 17 times in 3 days. And every image, every frame of her snooping, was now evidence. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was unauthorized surveillance of federal equipment. This was potential espionage. Karen had officially crossed into federal felony territory. And Maya, no longer the frightened sister, she had become an investigator, an archivist, and the quiet force Karen never expected. Marcus understood what was happening now. Karen's war wasn't about the Jeep. It was about power, about cleansing the community of those she didn't deem suitable. But what she didn't realize was, she had just made an enemy who builds federal conspiracy cases for a living, and Karen's carefully controlled suburban kingdom was about to collapse. The war officially began the moment Marcus received confirmation from JAG that the case had been accepted under military legal review. No longer just a neighborhood dispute, no longer a misunderstanding. This was now a federal investigation into civil rights violations and possible obstruction of military duty. And Maya, she wasn't alone anymore. Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams moved fast. She submitted formal notice to the Department of Defense, triggering a multi-branch coordination between military legal services and federal oversight. The case had teeth now, it had power, and Karen, she was about to learn what happens when you mess with federal infrastructure and military families. But Karen wasn't done flexing. 2 days after the federal complaint was filed, Maya found an official-looking letter shoved under the front door. Emergency notice of vehicle removal, 24-hour compliance required. It was carbon copied to the City Council, Local Police Code Enforcement, the Fire Department, and Animal Control. Yes, Karen had literally sickied Animal Control on a military vehicle violation. Maya stood in the doorway, stunned, reading the words, "This vehicle presents a safety hazard and must be removed to preserve community standards. Failure to comply may result in forced removal and legal action." All wrapped in HOA letterhead, all fake, but designed to terrify. Maya called Marcus. He was in a concrete bunker overseas, headset crackling with sand-filled static. "There's a tow truck circling the block," she whispered, panic rising in her throat. "The driver keeps looking at the Jeep, like he's measuring it." Marcus clenched his fists. "Activate the remote defense system." Because here's something Karen didn't know. Federal task force vehicles are wired for security, surveillance, counter-surveillance. Marcus remotely accessed the vehicle's systems, infrared sensors, motion tracking, automatic video logging, license plate capture. Every time the tow truck passed, it was recorded. Every time Karen stepped near, her movements were cataloged. And now, the system was logging intent to steal federal property. Marcus sent the logs to Sergeant Williams. Her reply came fast: "She's trespassing. Tampering with a federal surveillance unit. Rodriguez, we've got probable cause. Homeland Security has been notified." Karen's little HOA tantrum had just gone national security. But the best part, Maya kept digging. She connected with other residents, quietly comparing stories. Her teacher instincts kicked in, building case files, noting patterns, creating timelines. And what she uncovered next made her blood run cold. A development proposal, signed between Kensington Urban Holdings and a real estate firm called Eastbrook Development. The subject line: Willowbrook Estates Acquisition Strategy Phase SUI. Attached was a list of 47 homes sold to developers. Homes the HOA didn't even own. Homes that included Grandma Rose's. And in the margin of the document, a single word underlined in red ink: displace. Maya stared at the paper. The words blurred. She couldn't breathe. She picked up the phone and called Marcus again. They're not just harassing us. They're clearing military families out, one by one, to sell this place out from under us. Marcus didn't hesitate. Okay, we go full offensive. He contacted Captain Sarah Chen, his task force supervisor. Explained everything. Within hours, Chen mobilized a military legal advisory team and assigned Maya a point liaison. Now every move Karen made was being recorded, cataloged, analyzed. But it wasn't just about military response anymore. The neighborhood, once terrified, silent, compliant, started whispering louder. Maya's courage became a spark. Veteran families who'd stayed quiet for years began approaching her with their own stories. Mr. Henderson, Vietnam vet, fined for improper lawn edging. Mrs. Washington, cited for too many visitors. Her grandchildren, the Kowalskis, threatened over wheelchair ramps being visually disruptive. They'd all been scared, but not anymore. A whisper became a ripple. A wave became a resistance. And it all started in Grandma Rose's kitchen, over cups of cinnamon tea, old HOA papers, and Maya's quiet fury. Karen had controlled Willowbrook for years through intimidation. But now, the people she'd silenced were starting to speak, and every story they shared became fuel for a federal firestorm she could no longer contain. The counterattack had begun, and Karen, she was cracking. The cracks in Karen's empire didn't take long to widen. What started as hushed conversations over backyard fences turned into formal testimonies. Maya, once a quiet schoolteacher, was now the lead coordinator of a growing resistance. A web of military families, veteran neighbors, retired civil servants, and legal advocates all united under one goal: hold Karen accountable. And Karen, she could feel the walls closing in. Her confident strolls around the neighborhood became brisk, paranoid walks. The clip-clop of her designer heels on pavement was no longer a symbol of authority. It was a desperate echo of a woman losing control. But still, she clung to power. Her next move: private security. 3 days after the JA complaint, Maya spotted a white SUV circling the block. On the side, ExecSafe Security Community Standards Enforcement. 2 guards in tactical vests stepped out and began photographing the Jeep, hourly. Like clockwork, every dent, every decal, every inch of the vehicle was obsessively documented. But worse, they started talking to neighbors. Maya called Marcus again. This time, she was trembling. They're saying you're dangerous. That military vehicles are a threat to the community. People won't look me in the eye anymore. The PTA president told the principal I'm associated with volatile elements. Marcus felt the breath leave his chest. He wasn't just fighting for his property anymore. They were tearing down his sister's life, brick by brick, whisper by whisper. Captain Sarah Chen didn't need convincing. When she heard ExecSafe guards were photographing federal surveillance gear and interrogating military family members, her response was swift: Rodriguez, we don't come in hot yet. We let them bury themselves. Because that's the thing about power, hungry people like Karen, they always go too far, and they did. Marcus accessed the Jeep surveillance logs. Federal task force vehicles don't just record motion, they capture audio, facial recognition, and movement patterns. At 1:43 a.m., Karen herself, flashlight in hand, was caught examining the Jeep. She peered inside, photographed the dashboard, even tried the door handle. And she wasn't alone. ExecSafe guards stood beside her, pointing, taking notes, discussing components they had no clearance to even look at. It wasn't HOA harassment anymore. It was espionage. Karen was photographing classified equipment in a federal vehicle assigned to a narcotics task force. And she'd done it 17 times in 1 week. The footage was sent to JA, and then to Homeland Security. Within 24 hours, a federal report was opened for unauthorized surveillance of federal law enforcement property. The quiet war Karen had been waging now had national security implications. But Karen, cornered and spiraling, did what most tyrants do when exposed. She retaliated. Maya's principal pulled her aside. Concerned parents had emailed anonymously, accused her of being unstable, said she brought military aggression into the classroom. Maya, he said gently, there are community concerns. About your brother. About your involvement with federal authorities. It wasn't a conversation. It was a warning. Then came the messages. Notes under Maya's windshield. Voicemails with distorted voices. whispered threats at the grocery store. Accidents happen. You're just a teacher. Stay in your lane. You don't want to ruin your career over your brother's truck. It was textbook intimidation. Coordinated, cruel, dangerous. And Marcus, he was done being polite. He called 48 hours. Federal protective detail was assigned to Maya. Not bodyguards in suits, real agents. Hidden in plain sight, blending in with joggers, baristas, dog walkers. Karen was being watched. The watcher had become the watched. Exec security disappeared overnight. Chen had contacted their federal licensing bureau, informing them of the potential espionage. Their license was suspended pending investigation. But Karen, she panicked. She filed emergency complaints with the police, fire department, code enforcement, animal control, again all alleging that Maya and Marcus were running an unauthorized military operation from Grandma's house. It was absurd, but it created a paper trail of obsession, of harassment, of an HOA president gone completely rogue, and the feds were loving it, because every false claim was another charge. But the real damage came when Maya found what Karen had tried to bury. A second set of HOA rules, digitally edited, rewritten, and illegally distributed. They removed the exemptions for military vehicles, added new, fabricated restrictions, all designed to target families like theirs. It wasn't just a power grab, it was fraud. And now, it was federally prosecutable. Karen's world was unraveling, but she wasn't done digging her grave, not by a long shot. At 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, Karen made the mistake that would seal her fate. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of bolt cutters snapped through the silence again. This time caught on 3 high-definition cameras, recorded in real time by Maya and transmitted instantly to federal servers. Karen had returned, disheveled hair, a bathrobe flapping in the breeze, and pure rage burning behind her eyes. She brought a tow truck. No paperwork, no authorization. Just a stack of forged HOA notices and the delusion that her title gave her the right to act as judge, jury, and executioner. Marcus had barely opened his eyes in his military tent 8,000 miles away when his satellite phone buzzed with urgency. Maya's voice was panicked and breathless. She's here. She's cutting the locks. The tow truck is lifting the Jeep. Marcus didn't hesitate. He activated the emergency theft protocol on his Jeep's remote system. Within seconds, the vehicle's security software triggered federal alerts across 3 states, including the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and the Department of Defense. But Karen, she didn't stop. When the tow truck driver realized he was touching classified federal property, he tried to leave. He saw the decals. He saw the blinking sensors. He saw the words, Federal Surveillance Equipment, in bold on the dashboard. Lady, I don't care what HOA you run. This is federal. I'm out. He threw the gear into reverse and peeled off, tires screeching, leaving skid marks and disbelief in his wake. But the worst was yet to come. Karen, now red-faced, panting, wild-eyed, pulled out a new set of keys. She changed the locks on the neighborhood's front gate. And then she turned to Maya and screamed, if your brother wants his precious military toy back, he can follow proper HOA procedures. Military service doesn't make him above community standards. That statement, captured on video, recorded by neighbors, became Exhibit A in a federal theft and obstruction case. Federal marshals arrived 15 minutes later. Sirens silent, unmarked cars, bulletproof vests, and they found a closed gate, locked from the inside, preventing access to stolen federal property. That, legally, isn't just defiance. That's obstruction of federal justice. Marshal Jennifer Torres stepped out first. A seasoned officer who'd arrested cartel leaders in white, collar criminals alike. She walked up to the gate and radioed to her team. We've got a barricaded location and theft of federal property. Target is female 50s, white bathrobe, unstable, potentially obstructive. Proceed with caution. Then to Karine Mayem, open this gate now. You are interfering with an active federal investigation. Karen, still panting, crossed her arms and screamed. I don't recognize federal authority over private HOA property. You have no jurisdiction in my community. That was it. She had just declared war on the United States government. Back in Grandma's house, Maya sat with trembling hands as federal agents reviewed months of documentation. And that's when she whispered, there's more. I think they killed her. The room fell silent. Maya placed a folder on the table. Inside, violation notices sent to Grandma Rosa during her final weeks in hospice. Dozens of letters, fines, threats, legal action. All aimed at a dying woman who could barely sit up in bed. Maya's voice cracked as she read aloud. She asked me every night, Tank, will they take my house? Will they take it from you and Maya? I thought she was hallucinating, but she wasn't. She was scared. The blood pressure spikes. The stress. The fear. They'd weaponized bureaucracy against a dying grandmother. Marcus, now stateside, stood in the doorway of that same kitchen where Rosa once hummed lullabies. He smelled desperation. Not the vanilla candles Grandma used to burn, but the residue of fear, manipulation, and injustice soaked into the walls. He picked up the violation letters. His hands shook. She didn't just die. They broke her. That day, Maya was no longer just a teacher. She became a warrior with a ledger of crimes and a heart full of fire. "Tank," she said firmly, "this isn't about your Jeep anymore. It's about Grandma. It's about every family they've destroyed." And Marcus knew. They were beyond HOA fines now. Beyond property rights and board meetings. They were in Raicho territory. Organized crime. Civil rights violations. And Karen, she had no idea the storm that was about to consume her. 18 months later, the echo of that handcuff click still reverberated through Willowbrook Estates. But now it was drowned out by something else. Laughter. The sound of children playing in a brand new park. Built on the exact plot of land where Karen's house once stood. Where once stood manicured hedges and HOA rulebooks stacked in drawers, now rose a bronze plaque, Veterans Memorial Park, in memory of Rosa Rodriguez, and every family who stood their ground. Karen received 8 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. Her sentence included $647 in restitution to families she'd targeted. The federal judge didn't mince words during sentencing. This was not merely abuse of authority. This was domestic terrorism disguised as suburban management. Carl, he was sentenced to 6 years and banned for life from holding public office. His real estate empire crumbled. Lawsuits piled up. His name became a case study in corruption seminars across the country. But the real victory wasn't just legal. It was emotional, cultural, structural. Maya was elected HO president by unanimous vote. The first uncontested election in the neighborhood's history. Her first act. The Willowbrook Military Family Bill of Rights, a document that guaranteed protection for veterans, active duty members, and their families. No more bogus violations, no more silent fear. Marcus and Maya established the Rosa Rodriguez Foundation, a nonprofit offering free legal aid to military families facing HOA harassment. Their kitchen, once filled with cinnamon, fear, and the smell of burning injustice, now hummed with Zoom calls to Congress, legal training sessions, and quiet, determined laughter. The neighborhood changed. HOA meetings were open, live-streamed and multilingual. Veterans were asked to lead committees. Schoolchildren planted flags in the new park during Freedom Day. Property values rose. Community pride surged. And the Rodriguez home. It became a symbol. The story went viral. National news outlets picked it up. Military publications published it as a case study in rights advocacy. Even Congress took note. Introducing the Tank Rodriguez Act, a federal bill requiring financial transparency in HOA organizations and legal protections for military families. And every word of that legislation began in a kitchen that once echoed with a grandmother's quiet wisdom. Stand up to bullies, mijo. But do it the right way. Maya eventually married David Chen, Sarah's brother, a Navy veteran who moved to Willowbrook after hearing their story. Their wedding took place in the community center where Karen was arrested. They held hands under string lights and said their vows surrounded by neighbors who once feared retaliation, but now knew only pride. Marcus found his own happiness too. With Alina Martinez, the federal prosecutor who helped build their case. They bought the house next door to Grandma's. On the first Freedom Day celebration, hundreds gathered in the park. Veterans wore their uniforms. Children waved flags. Neighbors shared food, stories, and songs. And Maya, holding her brother's hand, looked around at everything they had built. They thought they were fighting one teacher and one soldier, she said, but they were wrong. They declared war on every military family in America. And we fought back, with law, with truth, and with unity. In that moment, under an American flag flying over peaceful homes, the Rodriguez family finally exhaled. Justice wasn't just served, it was lived. Every morning, Marcus sips his coffee on the front porch, watching the sunlight spill over the rooftops of Willowbrook Estates. No longer beige boxes ruled by fear, but homes filled with warmth, resilience, and hard-won peace. Across the street, children ride their bikes down sidewalks that once echoed with whispers and suspicion. Veterans plant flowers beneath blue, and gold plaques honoring those who served. And Maya, she's often seen in the park, reading under the same oak tree where Rosa once told bedtime stories in her rocking chair. The community has changed, not because a tyrant was removed, but because truth took root. It grew in silence, in pain and resistance, and finally bloomed into something more powerful than any title trust. The air smells different now, not just of jasmine and cut grass, but of freedom. Neighbors greet each other by name. The new HOA board, half veterans, half civilians, meets not behind closed doors but under open skies. The bylaws that once punished are now written to protect. And every 4th of July, as fireworks bloom above the neighborhood, the loudest cheers come not from the spectacle but from the simple knowledge that this life, this peace, was reclaimed. By a teacher, by a soldier, by a grandmother's love, and by a community that remembered what it meant to stand together. Justice came. But more importantly, so did healing. And in a quiet house on Maple Lane, where cinnamon still lingers in the air, a new generation grows up learning that yes, bullies can be beaten, if you fight the right way. If you or someone you love has ever been bullied by an HOA, if you've ever been silenced, ignored, or made to feel like a stranger in your own home, tell your story in the comments below. Because when we speak up, we are never alone. Hit like if you believe military families deserve protection, not persecution. Subscribe to Karen Stories 79 for more true accounts of everyday people standing up against corruption. And drop a comment with where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story reaches.